This tutorial is for the side pockets on the scrub trousers. First of all, when you cut your fabric out, you will have notched where your pockets should be laid. As you can see, I'm doing a slightly different pocket than the one that came with the PDF pattern. Mine has not got the cutout bit. I'm doing two the same front and back just for ease. So I've placed the pocket in line with the notch on both sides and pinned it there. The first thing I'm going to do is to stitch the pocket bag to the trousers. I'm using the 1 centimetre seam allowance allowed on the pattern. That's on the back piece, and now the front piece. And this tutorial is to show you how to do it if you haven't got an overlocker. So you would now zigzag or finish that off in any way you'd like, and for the front one you need to understitch the pocket bag. To understitch, you pull the seam allowance towards the pocket bag, place it under your machine with the right side up, and edge stitch through the seam allowance. So your seam allowance and your pocket bag are to the right, and you're going to edge stitch to keep the pocket bag rolling inside. This only needs to be done on the front pocket. So now you have your pocket bags stitched on. We're going to do the French seam method. So instead of putting right sides together like you would usually do, you need to put wrong sides together. So the seam ends up on the right side of the garment. So place your side seam at the top together and your pocket bags together. If you're not used to doing this, I suggest you pin. But you'll get used to just going straight to the machine. Now we've got 1 centimetre seam allowance and we're going to do 2 seams, so we need to divide it. So I'm going to do a very small seam to start with. So you need to make sure you have got your top and your bottom fabric layers in line. Leave the needle in, pivot round and go round the pocket bags close to the edge. Again, needle in, pivot and down the rest of the seam of your trousers, outside seam with a small seam. Now you're going to just give it a check that you've caught all of the layers underneath. And then before you turn it through, you're going to need to notch the two corners that you pivoted on. So with some scissors, just cut right up to the pivot, otherwise they'll bunch when you turn. So turn and smooth, so your stitch line is right on the edge of your fold. And then you're going to stitch again with the rest of the seam allowance. So I tend to use the edge of my foot as a guide, and the idea of this French seam is to trap the seam allowance, the small seam allowance on the other side, inside. So it's a self-finished seam. This gives you a finished off edge inside, so there's no raw edges, and on the outside a nice tidy seam with your pocket. All finished. Now I'm going to sew the inside leg seam in the same way. So wrong sides together first. One leg finished. So now we have the two legs stitched together, we need to sew the seams around the crotch. And to do that, with a French seam, you need to put, again, the wrong sides together first. So I'm going to slip this leg inside the other leg with the wrong sides together and match the underneath seam. You can now go all the way round the back to the front. So for the French seam, it's the very small seam allowance again. The seams can become quite bulky under the legs, so it's a good idea to push one to the front and one to the back. again, pin if you feel unsure. Now this curved edge will need to be clipped to be able for it to turn neatly. Just like we did with the pivots, we need to snip down maybe 4 cuts around the bend at the front and the back. You can now turn right sides together. And go around the crotch seam again. After you've finished sewing your crotch seam, I've been upstairs and pressed my waistband down. So I've turned it under once, folded it over and turned it again, the width of my tape that I'm going to be threading through. So I'm starting at the back. The back is the crotch, the longer crotch, and I'm going to leave a gap because I have some size labels coming. So I'm going to leave a gap to thread them in there and stitch that later. So I'm edge stitching around. And I'm going to stop about 2.5 centimetres before the centre front seam. I should put a dot there and a dot on the other side there, because I'm going to sew up to the point there and leave a gap, and then from sew over the centre front and then leave another gap. These are going to be for the tapes to come out after when you thread them through. Don't forget to go backwards and forwards to secure it off. Yeah. It's not like in the thick French seam. And if this was my real garment, I'd leave a gap there for my ticket, but size label, but no size label for this. So trim all your edges off. And at the front, cut your extra threads for your holes. My machine's knotting up. So when you thread your thread through, you leave a 10 cm length out of each end with the thread through the rest.